Hey, it is Thursday, and we are tackling our 8th one another, and we're going to finish, of course, tomorrow with our last one. It'll be our 9th and final one another that we're going to study in this devotional series. Today's devotion on one another is called Be Hospitable. Be hospitable to one another. You know, that's a word that we rarely use, and we probably rarely even hear that word, hospitable, today. Other than the word hospital, probably the times that you would hear it most would be talking about, for example, hospice care. Hospice care. What is hospice care? Well, it is care for people at the end of life, but it's not just that. Hospice care is expanded to care for people who really just in many ways cannot take care of themselves. But it's more than that. We have people in our church and connected to our church that work in hospice and help arrange hospice care. They don't consider what they do to simply be a job or a career. They consider what they do to be what it indeed is, a ministry. A ministry. Because they are ministering to people. They offer a more loving, uniquely kind of tender care into the lives of people who desperately need it. You know, we're told in the Word of God to live lives of hospitableness to one another. Romans chapter 12, verses 11 and 12, the Message renders it this way: don't burn out. Keep yourselves fueled and aflame. Be alert, servants of the Master, cheerfully expectant. Don't quit in hard times. Pray all the harder and help needy Christians, and be inventive or creative in hospitality. And then in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 13 to 16, it says, we saw how Titus felt. He was exuberant over your response. His joy was just double. It was wonderful to see how revived and refreshed he was by everything that you did for him. Paul's writing saying, this church, you went over and above in loving Titus and caring for him. You went out on a limb for him. He says, and as it turned out, the things he said you did, he had not exaggerated one bit. Titus saw for himself that everything I'd said about you and how you would treat him was true. He just could not quit talking about it over and over again. The story of your prompt obedience and your dignity and sensitivity and your hospitality. He said when Titus got back, he just couldn't stop talking about how hospitable you were toward him. He was overwhelmed by it all. He could not be more pleased. And Paul says, I am so confident and I'm so proud of you. One of the great things about the New Testament church was its hospitality. Matter of fact, it was really a lifeline to the New Testament church. Without the gift of hospitality being in full swing, there might not have ever been growth and spiritual blessings in the New Testament church. J. Vernon McGee writes this: without Christian hospitality, the early church could not have existed. The traveling missionaries who spread the good news of the gospel had to find somewhere to stay. And the only place for them to stay was in the homes of Christians. Inns in that day were notorious, it says, for their indecency and their immorality. Without private hospitality of Christian homes, the work of the early missionaries would have come to a standstill. For 200 years, there was no such thing as a church building. The Roman decree issued by Nero made it unlawful for believers to even build a church building. The first church building we know wasn't even erected until 265 AD in Persia. Thus, the church was compelled to meet in houses and those who had bigger rooms. It says, amazingly enough, the church, without temples and cathedrals and sanctuaries and massive buildings, it says, was clearly the envy of the world. The church experienced a blessing, a great blessing. But then it says, as the church began to grow and facilities arose and buildings arose and cathedrals arose, it turned out to not just be a blessing but also a curse. It says by decree, Constantine declared the whole Roman Empire to be Christian. And with that decree, Christians stopped meeting in homes and they started meeting in sanctuaries. And as a result, the church grew stronger as an organization, but weaker in its ministry and discipling operation. Historically, this time was known as the Dark Ages. Now listen to me. I'm not saying that churches shouldn't meet, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have sanctuaries. Here's what I'm saying to you. I'm saying to you that, for example, the reason that New Hope does home groups is because so much of the church today has lost its emphasis, its intimacy, the way it was in the New Testament. And I believe that our home groups help to rekindle that which has been lost. Even us as a church, our church started over 20 years ago in our home. And we moved from home to home, and we began to rent little facilities. And while I'm thrilled that we have 40 acres of property and the buildings and facilities that we have, everybody who was at our church in those early days misses those intimate meetings in our homes as we went from home to home, and then little tiny buildings to little buildings. There was an intimacy as a church moving from home to home that is lost in a big building. That is why we do our home groups, to try to recapture some of that which was lost. Now, if we're supposed to be hospitable, what does that word mean? What is hospitality? It's a compound word, a compound Greek word, phileos, which means brotherly love, and xenos, which means stranger. It's really brotherly love towards strangers. That's kind of why hospice care is a perfect description of what it is, because people who work in hospice, they rarely know the people that they're sent to take care of. Most of them don't know who these people are. They're just introduced to a family that needs hospice care. And they're not a part of their blood relatives. They're not a part of their family, very rarely. But you know what happens? Even though they don't know them, they love them. They love the people that they're given just like their family. So much so that almost every time a person dies, and I've had it in my own family, almost every time a person dies who is under hospice care, when you go to the funeral, you know who you're going to see there? You're going to see family and friends and people who have known these people for years, but you're also going to see those hospice workers. Why are they there? Why do you see these hospice workers? Because in just that short period of time, practicing Christian love, they have bonded with that man or bonded with that woman, and they treat them, they feel like family. And therefore, when that loved one dies, the hospice workers are right there. They're ministering to strangers. They're showing Christian love for strangers. Robert Morris, the pastor at Gateway Church, spoke about this passage. And listen to me. Let me just read to you what he said in closing today. Many churches are filled with strangers who have known each other for years. Many people have come to church together and sang together and prayed together and broken bread together for years, yet they know very little about one another. In essence, they may be members of the same assembly, but they are spiritual strangers when it comes to the matter of biblical Christian hospitality. And then he looks out at the members at Gateway Church, and this is what he says from the pulpit. I want you to listen to this because I feel like I want to say the same thing right now. From this video, I'm saying this to those who are part of New Hope. If you do not love one another at Gateway, he's saying at Gateway, I'll say at New Hope. If you don't love one another at New Hope and get to know one another and show hospitality to one another in our own church family, how can we expect a stranger to walk through these doors and ever feel welcomed and loved? Wow. New Hope, if we don't show consideration and love and fellowship toward one another, if we don't love one another in that way and fellowship with one another, how can we ever expect strangers and visitors to walk through our door and feel loved? Be hospitable to one another. Be willing to love even strangers, people that you don't know yet. Love them and care for them until you know them. Father, I thank you for this principle today. Be hospitable to one another. God, help us to do that as a church. Help us to reach out to people that we don't truly know and get to know them and be loving toward them, so that no one, no visitor ever walks through the doors of our church and is there very long until they feel, you know what? I feel like I am home. And we'll thank you for what you're going to do in the name of Jesus. We pray. Amen and amen. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us today.